because the question is, why is it that we would be heading toward a war with Russia?
Well, I think that it is very clear that, well, first of all, I just had the occasion to travel for a few days to Moscow, and I attended a conference there on Russia-China relations, and I had also a whole bunch of very important institutional discussions. Now, it is very clear that the reason why Russia is being targeted is because, and why Putin is being targeted, because if you remember, when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 91, basically, all the promises which were given to Gorbachev basically were all broken. They had promised that there would never be the moving of NATO to the Russian borders. There would be no NATO beyond the East German states in the unified Germany. All of this has been broken. And what has happened basically instead is, you had the Yeltsin period, which in the conscience of the Russians has been a decade of genocide. In these 10 years, the demographic curve of Russia had collapsed by 1 million per year. You had a complete sellout. You had the oligarchs taking over the property of the Russian people, becoming rich, and basically privatizing anything. You had Jeffrey Sachs, who went with the shock therapy, and the intention of the neocons and the British and some other forces in the West was to reduce the status of the Soviet Union being a superpower to a Russia which would just be a raw material producing and exporting third world country. And they succeeded to a certain extent in doing that. For example, the shock therapy reduced the Russian industrial capacities from 91 to 94 to only 30%. You had absolute misery. People were poor, and it was a real genocide, as Sergei Glaziev wrote in a book with that title. So then eventually Putin came. He was appointed by Yeltsin, but Putin came and he started to undo all of these things. He managed to get back control over the oil and gas resources. And the West had already, or some people in the West had thought they had all of this in their pocket and they would eventually control all of the raw materials of the very large territory of Russia. And then Putin comes back and he reverses that. And, obviously he had to make certain deals with these oligarchs. And this is still hampering the situation up to the present day to a certain extent. But, he proved also Obama later on to be wrong, who had already bragged that, Russia is just a regional power. But when Putin intervened in Syria in 2015 and basically, completely reversed the situation there, he proved that he's a global player and that nobody can bypass Russia. And the military moves which Putin has done in response to the NATO changed doctrine, basically, and going in the direction of new weapon systems based on new physical principles, outmaneuvering the military of the United States and NATO to a certain extent. That caused a complete rage, and the demonization campaign of Putin started. So if not take into account, the shock therapy in the 90s, what the West did to Russia in the Yeltsin period, one cannot understand why the Russian population is so absolutely, I think more than 80% are backing Putin. I met several people who I asked what they thought of Putin, and they said he's the best president in the history of Russia ever, because the Russian people are completely thankful to him that he undid what happened in the Yeltsin period, and he's bringing Russia back. And despite the sanctions, which do hurt the Russian economy, despite of that, he is bringing Russia back and has brought Russia back. So I think that that is something one should keep in mind, because the media like to always cut a certain date, like Putin fell from the heaven and all of a sudden he's demon, but it leaves out what happened before. And it is that fallacy of composition which is then being used to manipulate people to think that Putin is a devil. The Russian people think he's the best president of their history. And I think people in the West should think about that, that after all, what counts is what is the outcome of his government? Is he doing something for the common good of the people or not? So anyway, I just wanted to say that. And it was very helpful for me to have these discussions. I haven't been in Russia for many years, and to refresh a direct impression was extremely helpful. And I was actually quite taken aback that several people, quite independently from their particular angle, said there is a serious discussion in Russia that war is an absolute possibility. And just in the last couple of days, this was publicly confirmed by the representative for non-proliferation and arms control in the foreign ministry, Andrei Belousov, who spoke in front of the United Nations, saying, yes, I confirm Russia is preparing for war, but we are only doing it in response to the fact that the United States is preparing a war. So I think this is a very serious thing. And if you look at other remarks which were made in the recent period by General Ben Hodges, who is the former US commander in Europe, who in a meeting in Warsaw in Poland said that he thinks that the United States will be at war within 15 years. And you had Xi Jinping talking to his military officers, saying that they have to be ready for war. And then you have this largest NATO maneuver since the Cold War, Trident Juncture in Norway, with 50,000 soldiers, 10,000 soldiers from Germany alone, which is a very provocative maneuver, basically rehearsing how to replace or displace NATO troops in the case of a war with Russia very quickly. Russia has regarded that maneuver as a complete provocation, and they will launch some missile tests, I think the day after tomorrow, also in the north of Russia, close to this maneuver. So that shows you that we are really in a very, very heightened danger. And I think people should really understand that we must have a better relationship between the United States and Russia and the United States and China, because once these things get out of control, it could mean the end of civilization and the complete annihilation of the human race. So this is what we are talking about when we are talking about the midterm election, and I think people should take that to heart.